Hello and welcome to ETG's The State of Play, the show where we ask what on earth is going on and where can I go on holiday. I'm Sam, I'm the MD of Experience Travel Group, and I'm joined as ever by my co-founder and all-round travel geek, Melissa. Melissa, how's it going?
Yeah, really good. Travel is sort of up and running again, and we've had people travel and have fantastic holidays. So yeah, really, really good.
It feels so good to say that, doesn't it? So, Melissa, as ever, we're going to ask you to take us to the check-in, where we give you 60 seconds to recap on all the week's news on where we're at in travel in Asia. Go.
Okay, so I've got one sort of a big news story, which is that Cambodia just this week has unexpectedly reopened to fully vaccinated travellers with immediate effect. So that's fantastic news and quite sort of out of the blue, really, and we're really pleased about that. Thailand has now been open for a couple of weeks too, although with some slightly confusing rules, which I'll come to later. Sri Lanka's open, and unlike other destinations, British visitors are actually making up the biggest proportion of travellers to the island. The Maldives never really closed and is consistently being seen considerably high tourist numbers from all over the world. India's technically open, but they're not quite yet issuing e-visas, which is a sort of another issue I'll come to. Oman opened in September. It was very popular over half term and is beginning to get very heavily booked up for Christmas holidays. Bali in Indonesia is opened, but it's got quite a prohibitive quarantine period that I just think at the moment is too much for people to want to go there. And then Langkawi in Malaysia finally opened up this week as well. There's nothing concrete from the wider parts of Indonesia or Malaysia, or for places like Laos, Vietnam and Bhutan, but watch this space as I think there could be some more good news to come soon.
Brilliant. Well, there's a lot to digest there. And while plenty is possible, I guess the devil is really in the detail. So I'm going to invite Melissa to come to the departure lounge to tell us in a little more detail about entry requirements and rules for all of those countries mentioned. So let's start, Melissa, with the easy part. Sri Lanka and the Maldives. That's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, although there's lots of detail for all the countries. So I'm going to try and keep it as simple as I can, rather than bore people to death with lots of lots of details. So Sri Lanka, yeah, quite straightforward. If you're double vaccinated, you just need to produce a negative PCR test a maximum of 72 hours before you go. For the Maldives, you need to produce one a maximum of 96 hours before you go. And a key point for the Maldives is it's one of few destinations where you actually don't need to be double vaccinated to enter. So that's something to note there. Oman is similar to Sri Lanka. You also need a PCR test 72 hours before you go. And all three destinations have slightly different rules for different aged children. So basically, I think the best thing to say there is to give us a call to discuss that if you want more clarity around that. And as I said before, we've now had quite a few people with and without children to travel to all three of those destinations, and they've all found it pretty straightforward and have had great holidays. There's nothing too off-putting there.
Perfect. Okay, and let's move on to Thailand. That's not quite so simple, is it? What's the detail there?
No, Thailand is actually quite complicated on paper to the point that it took us a while to fathom it all out, but perhaps not as much, not quite as complicated as it sounds actually in practice. So the main point there is double vaccinated visitors from 63 countries, including the UK, can enter what's known as the test and go scheme. You have to take a test 72 hours before you fly out and another one on arrival. Once you've taken the arrival test, you then proceed to your hotel and you wait in the room until the results arrive, which is usually 6 to 12 hours. So if you arrive in the evening, obviously by the time you wake up in the morning, you're probably going to have your results. And providing the results negative, you're free to do whatever you want and move around Thailand as you please. The only thing is you'll be handed a lateral flow test, which they'll expect you to take on day 7.
Good, yeah, and we've got clients I know booked on the test and release scheme to go next week, haven't we?
We have, and a colleague is going to go on holiday and test out the test and go for us as well.
Excellent. So I guess the fly in the ointment there is probably children between 12 and 18. Is that right?
Yeah, so younger ones are fine, just as previously explained, but there are some complications if they're 12 to 18 years old and not double vaccinated. It is a bit of a complicated one, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it doesn't mean that you can't travel to Thailand with single dose teenagers or teenagers who aren't jabbed, but there are slightly different rules. And once again, I think if people want to know more about that, it's probably best if they contact us directly rather than me sort of bore them too much here.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and the big development for the week, Cambodia. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Cambodia have followed the lead of Thailand really, and very suddenly this week they've just announced that they're going to open straight away. We haven't got all the fine print yet because it only happened in the last sort of 72 hours, but they appear to have made it much easier than Thailand. Children under 18 seem to count as double vaccinated if their parents are, and you just need a PCR test 72 hours before you go, and then you get a quick free lateral flow test on arrival. I think the only hesitation I really have with Cambodia is about flights and how you're going to get in. The flights have been quite limited throughout the pandemic, but I'd expect those to be reinstated pretty quickly now it's opened up. And I actually think now could be an amazing once-in-a-lifetime chance to go to Cambodia, to places like Angkor Wat that are usually busy, sort of get in there and see it before the crowds return, which I think would probably take a while to filter through.
Yeah, it'd be amazing. I remember going to Angkor Wat back in '97, and the chance to explore places in the jungle and all of that without tourists would be incredible, wouldn't it? So, just the last question I'm going to ask India. Have we got any more detail on India's opening?
So India's open, but you have to get an old-fashioned paper visa, which is a bit of a palaver, quite frankly. We're waiting for clarity around the visa application process and a bit more detail on how travel's working on the ground before we get our holidays back up and running. The good news is that we're starting to hear from different people that interstate travel is actually pretty easy. So we're really expecting to be able to resume our holidays there from the 1st of January.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much there, Melissa. Now, this takes us to the section of the show where we say, don't quote us, and we give you a little bit of insider information. Just like to say that Melissa, in the last show, did predict that Cambodia would be next to open. So you do need to watch this. Now, Melissa, what have you got for us this week?
Well, firstly, I've heard a couple of things that make me very hopeful that Bhutan will open early next year. Nothing concrete, but just a few things I've heard that make me think that that's definitely going to happen. And I also personally predict that the rules for Thailand might put some people off, and that the Thai authorities are going to quickly have to simplify the entry requirements, because I just don't think they're going to get the visitor numbers that they want. And they're going to realise that people are just choosing other destinations like Sri Lanka, and I think they're going to have to simplify it a little bit. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, watch this space, because, as I say, we've been right before. Now, that's all we've got time for today. But I just wanted to reiterate what Melissa said earlier. Just, give us a call if you've got any questions at all, and we'd be really happy to talk you through. We have digested and redigested these rules and regulations, and we are staying right on top of them, so we can help make these things possible, make travel possible, really. So just get in touch and we'll speak to you. We will come to you again in a month's time with the next update, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks very much. Goodbye.